Welcome to the National Youth Jazz Collective. Here we are again on our wonderful hashtag National Youth Jazz Wednesday live stream. So today I'd like to welcome two of our core tutors, very dear colleagues and friends. Please could you welcome to our conversation on piano and composer Liam Noble. Hi Liam.
Hello.
And then flautist and composer Rowland Sutherland. Hi Rowland.
Hi everyone.
So before we start the conversation, just a few things to our wonderful audience. If you'd like to ask any questions during the course of the conversation, just go into Facebook and type your questions into comments. They'll get texted through to me and I'll be able to put them to the interviewees as and when we get them. So don't be shy, lots of things to talk about. And then obviously, if you don't get a chance to watch all of it, we'll put it on YouTube and you'll be able to catch up on YouTube as well. Big thank you to Nick Brown for helping us set everything up, and welcome to the conversation. So both of you, you've both taught on the summer schools several times and you've worked with our young musicians and you've also done some of the regional work we've been doing as well. So over the sort of the history of the 13 years, I think you've got a really good picture of how NYJC has blossomed and grown. We've also worked at the conservatoires together, so you could see what we were aiming for, what we were trying to provide the young musicians before they go to conservatoire. But I think one of the things that you're not aware of is that often when I talk to the young musicians, they sidle up to me and say, what do you think your tutors were doing at our age? And they've often wanted to know what you were both doing when you were aged 14 to 18 and how you learnt the music. So Liam, might we start with you? How did you get into the music in the first place and your journey during the teenage years?
Well, I guess my first steps into jazz were through Scott Joplin piano rags. And I recently played one on one of my live stream concerts and got loads of comments from people saying, oh, I've got that book, I've got that book. Loads of people had the Scott Joplin piano rags book. And that sort of, I think, introduced me to syncopation in a very sort of light way. And I think from there, I just sort of got into Jelly Roll Morton, and from Jelly Roll Morton to Ellington. And then I think once you hit Ellington, you get into everything else.
Yeah.
You know? And the Bromley Central Library was very helpful. I used to tape a lot of vinyl. So yeah, I learned a lot of stuff from whatever was in the library, some quite random things, Sun Ra. I just get it out because it was there, you know.
What did you do with that listening? Was it you just put it on and had a listen and then took the album back again, or did you do anything a bit more focused on it at that age?
I think I was. It wasn't exactly focused in that I didn't know that I wanted to be a jazz musician, but I also used to play clarinet, so I used to try and sound like Barney Biggard and Jimmy Hamilton, the Ellington band, and then tried to sound like Jelly Roll Morton, but that was just playing written transcriptions, so I had no concept of improvising with that. But I do remember. Remember Sonny Stitt and the Modern Jazz Quartet. There's a tune on there called Tour de Force, and someone somewhere has got a cassette recording of me playing that for about 40 minutes. One tune, you know. It's probably terrible, but that's what I was doing mostly.
That's a good start. And what about you, Rowland? What were you doing sort of in your teenage years?
Well, like Liam, I mean, I started on piano actually, and I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And so eventually I went to the libraries, the local libraries. I was in Hackney, and would just rummage through the records. And occasionally I, listen to some jazz recordings, and I listen to classical, some world music, things like that. But it wasn't till after I'd been playing the flute about a year. So I started when I was about 12 when I got to secondary school. And I was in this instrument shop, trying to buy a new flute because the flute.
Have we lost Rowland? Can you hear him?
Lost the sound, yeah.
Yeah, we've lost your sound, Rowland.
Am I back?
That's it, you're back.
Terrific. And
so you got your flute. That's as far as we got. And then
okay, yeah, I was in this shop in Liverpool Street trying out a new flute because the school ones were all bashed up. And the chap came into the shop and kept looking around whilst I was warming up on this flute, and went to my dad, "Is that your son?" And blah, de blah, de blah. And he said, he sounds all right. Why don't you bring him to my big band?
Oh,
And it turned out to be, his name is Phil Revens, and he was a trumpet player. He ran something called Young Jazz, which was, it's kind of like a rehearsal big band. And they would rehearse in his loft up at his house. And that's where I saw a lot of Nijo players who would use that band as a sort of like practice. And that's how I got into it. So I hadn't been improvising at that stage, but I was able to sight read because I had piano lessons.
right.
And so I was just picking up what everyone else was doing. And so I got a taste for playing in like big bands and ensembles and things like that. So from then, I then started playing in Brian Booth. He had a band that was just around the corner from where I used to live in Stoke Newington at the Pegasus pub. And so I think that was on a Sunday lunchtime. I used to go over there, and Kathy Stobart had something as well. I think it was at City Lit or somewhere like that. So to go along to her bands as well. And whilst I was doing all of that, I was also, you know, doing the classical music stuff. So I went to, when I was 14, I went to Centre for Young Musicians, which was at Pimlico School then. And there was all kinds of orchestras and ensembles and bands and that I was playing in London schools, training orchestra, and then London School Symphony Orchestra, London Youth Symphonia. So we're doing like orchestral chamber music, chamber orchestra sort of stuff, symphony stuff, and then the wind band stuff. So it was a real, you know, cross section of big classical ensemble playing. And
How often were those ensembles meeting?
oh, well, there was like Pimlico School, there was a lot of the wind band stuff would happen there, and the Symphonia. And then the LSSO, London School Symphony Orchestra, those will be residential courses, so they will be in different parts of the country and abroad as well. And then and the training orchestra would be in, you know, different places around Britain. So so yeah, that was great. And of course, you know, the standards was very, very high. So it showed you where you needed to be. And then at the Cockpit Theatre, there was, I don't even know what it was called, but there was something going on there where we would do free improvisation. So that was my first taste of free improvisation. Again, I was about, I don't know, 15 by then, and sort of got a taste for that, and eventually went to you know, the drummer John Stevens.
Yeah.
He had something called community music, and I went along to one of those courses. And the main focus on that was improvised music, and we do a bit of jazz around that. And Louise Elliott was our sort of tutor. And you know, I remember a band grew out of that with a chap called John Lloyd, who's a really great sax player in the free improv scene. And that's when I started performing free improv. So yeah, it was a real cross section of music.
Liam, when you first play in an ensemble, was it as a clarinetist or as a pianist or?
Yeah, I was going to add to what I'd said before. I left a lot of things out. Actually, a lot of what Rowland said reminded me that a lot of my formative musical life was spent sitting in a Bromley Youth concert band in what is now Bromley Youth Music Trust, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I did a lot of wind bands, orchestras, quintets, loads of Mozart wind quintets and stuff like that. But that thing of playing with other people and trying to blend sound and figure out how to, I mean, that was an interesting part of the training, although it's slightly different from what happens in jazz, but it's also quite an interesting thing to bring in when you need it, I think, you know.
Do you think that's influenced your piano playing? Do you think more orchestrally when you play?
Oh, well, a lot, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think when I first heard Keith Jarrett, I thought, oh, there's somebody who's done that as well, you know. And I mean, everybody has a bit of that. But I think, you know, listening to somebody like Thelonious Monk, it's kind of right the other side in terms of his philosophy of sound. It's like things jutting out and different levels rather than a continual sort of smooth kind of blend, you know. So I mean, it's interesting to see what people do at either end of the spectrum, I think.
Did you ever play any classical music like Bach or anything that was contrapuntal?
With other musicians?
Or on the piano? As you were, I'm just wondering where your sort of contrapuntal way of playing evolved from.
Oh yeah, well I think a thing that started in my 20s with this session with the Goldberg variations and the Glenn Gould recording that everybody had. But that lasted a long time, and it's still, if I had any time now to practice, I would probably, that's the first thing I would go back to, is try and get it right again. but that, yeah, his particular approach to the counterpoint as well seemed to have like a slight kind of bridge to jazz. Like he'd bring other lines in that were interrupting things rather than blending. It's like suddenly some bass line that looks on the page like it doesn't matter, he'd sort of bring it in singing along with it, and as if it's the most important thing. And I really love that, and I love that about jazz, that someone can come in with something that throws everything in another direction, you know.
Do you like the sort of the boldness of it? Is that what sort
yeah,
of
and it always feels like it's got a rhythmic edge to it, to me, you know. It but Glenn Gould always feels like he's sort of swinging in a funny kind of way.
Yeah. What about the classical world influencing on you, Rowland, especially as a flautist and a composer? Are there sort of is any crossover, similar sort of thing happened for you?
Well, you might be surprised that the way I got into classical music was when I was about 6 or 7. I was always riveted by the adverts that we used to have on TV, because they're nothing like the adverts. Well, I haven't had a TV for 25 years or more, but when I used to have a TV, the adverts weren't that great. But back then, in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, it was mostly classical music. And I'd be like, you know, wow, what was that? I've got to find this. This is, because it would like excite me, you know. So it's like when they had that Old Spice aftershave advert,
Oh yeah,
with the guy on the sea and on the surfboard.
come in
This big dramatic music. It was I found out that it was at 7 years old that it was Carmina Burana, and I had to get the recording. And then it kept on going on like that. There was a Pure Wall advert that was playing Beethoven. And when I got to my piano teacher, I'd say, Miss, what's this piece? And I'd fumble on the piano trying to play the melody. And she says, oh, that's the Pastoral Symphony. That's the slow, and, you know, things like that. And I'd run off to Woolworths and buy the recording. So that's how I actually got into orchestral music. And then I'd find the records at the library as well. And I'd follow the composer's repertoire. So,
sounds like both of you were really inquisitive. You weren't just waiting to be spoon-fed. Both of you were quite inquisitive, and that's definitely something that's present in you as professional musicians, and the way that you make music. You're constantly inquisitive and striving. I'm just wondering if you think it's possible to develop as a fully fledged musician without having that inquisitiveness. Liam.
Oh, that's a real humdinger question. Well, I think that there's two aspects to being fully fledged, and one is how you feel yourself about what you're doing. Like, do you feel like, not that you should ever necessarily stop striving, but you feel like you've got somewhere where you're roughly comfortable. And the second thing is whether anybody else feels like that and wants to and asks you to do anything. I think if you know, and there are people that don't get asked particularly to work with other people a lot, but have their own thing and they are fully fledged. And then there's other people who work a lot with lots of people and can fit in with a lot of different situations. And sometimes they may not always have the most original voice, but they're fully fledged in what they're doing. I don't know. I think it's pretty subjective. You know?
I think in both those scenarios you've talked about, there's not necessarily passive, but they've taken some responsibility along the way for their own interests and their own creative journey.
Yeah.
So you've been quite vocal on your blog about sharing ideas, which have been fantastic for the young musicians. And I wondered what inspired you to write those, or to start talking to them about various things.
It's funny actually. I think what happened is I was writing blogs about various different things dotting around all over the place, and then I did one that was a kind of advice for young musicians, and it got loads of hits, and I thought I should do some more. It was kind of business really, although it's not business, it's not, but I thought if lots of people want to read it, maybe I should think of some more. And then I thought, but how do I make myself think of things? And I thought, well, if I hitch it onto the alphabet, I've got 26 blogs that I have to write, you know, and if some of them aren't as good as others, then whatever, you know. But
so, because with you having particularly worked in pairs as well as the summer school, and I think you did two about 3 years apart, where you've worked together as the co-leaders of a group. And I'm just wondering if you started to see any patterns of things, either questions that were being asked or sort of reoccurring issues that you needed to support them in, or sort of themes that were recurring that you think, oh, there's a bit of a pattern going on here with youth education and your experience of NYJC. Rowland, maybe first.
yeah, go on, Rowland.
I can't really think of anything. Actually, it was 13 years ago, was it?
Yeah.
I can't actually think of any, because I remember the group we had. They were very bright. I mean, they were really up on everything. So I don't.
You've had several. You've had Leeds and you've had Uppingham, and you've had, but I think 2 or 3 times the two of you have actually worked with the groups together. And so I'm just wondering if there's, particularly for that age groups, I know you work in conservatoires a lot, and then there's different things maybe to address at that level. But a lot of the youngsters that we work with say that they don't have access to anything locally, and so that they're really hungry for the information that we share. They really work hard and absorb it and focus on it, and then they take it home, they keep practicing. And I'm just wondering if you sort of noticed, particularly in comparison to your own development as teenagers, if there was sort of key elements that have sort of come out of that experience that you might want to share with us.
Well, I mean, what I came to realize, I don't know if it's just personal to me, but the more I absorbed different musics, the more it fed into each other, and the more I was developing that way. So for me, it was receiving, you know, the goodness and the ingredients of other musics that sort of like, you know, just helped me to grow, and my curiosity kept growing. It was like I was on a quest, and through that journey, I was just absorbing practically everything, and I was just finding it was giving me more strength musically, and just making my voice stronger, you know, as a musician. So it's just been a never-ending quest, and it's as if it's an eternal journey.
So did you recognise that in the young musicians? I think what I'm trying to evoke is a snapshot of, because none of us were in the room with you for a lot of the time, the two of you. It's an exclusive experience in a way that you've both had working with those young musicians. And I'm wondering if there were sort of key things, you know, I have the annual experience of auditioning every year, and there are key things that I recognise, like certain regions when I go back, that they're still saying they're struggling to get access to education. And then the sort of things they ask, what should we practice? How should we learn the music? You guys tended to work with the more sort of advanced groups, and I'm just wondering at that level if there were things that you'd sort of noticed.
Go on, Liam.
Well, I mean, I certainly remember that group that we did the first course in Leeds, and I think I remember Laura Jerd was in it.
Yeah.
Was Mark Lewandowski in?
He was a bit later on. Yeah.
Was he later on? But I mean, you know, there were a lot of musicians that went on to kind of do things in their own right, and I think a lot of the stuff is just time. People expect things to happen really quick, you know, and there are whiz kids and there are people that take stuff on really quickly and they get really, really good really quickly. But I think even that, sometimes if it happens too quick, you can get disillusioned with not feeling enough from it. Like,
Yeah.
I can do all these things, something's missing, maybe. And I think it's just like a slow maturing kind of process. You know, the thing that I've always felt is that I've always enjoyed being a bit crap at things because there's the possibility of getting better. It feels great to get better, and I think people that get on well with this music enjoy the process of trying to get better, not necessarily at playing it, but at hearing it, or get better ideas, or be more open, or hear more music. Like Rowland says, different things feeding in, you know, give you a sort of revelation. I mean, I still kind of live for that, really.
Yeah.
Hearing something, like I remember hearing some kind of harmonica music from Laos, I think it was, and thinking, what is that? You know, that was like 5 years ago. I'd never heard it, and it was a total revelation. You know.
Yeah. One thing I
Go on. Yeah,
Sorry.
I've sort of finished.
No, right. No, one thing, it's somehow something you said twigged my memory, but one thing I've noticed in a couple of times when I've been there is that some of the young players, they've done so much on their own and they've done so much to hone their own playing, but when it comes to playing in the ensemble, they're not really listening to each other very well. They're not really blending in with each other as well as they could be. So it was like a matter of, they're very proficient themselves on their instrument, but when it comes to playing together as an ensemble, they weren't as well equipped to carry those things out as well as they could. So I do recall, having to spend time with them to get them to really listen and to almost get inside the other person's playing and get them to play as one rather than as many. And that took a little while, but usually, come sort of the last 2 days or so, they'd get it and they'd really lock in with each other. That's one of the main areas I felt that, and some of them said, I remember there was a flute player, clarinetist, who wanted to improve her ensemble playing, and so I remember, spending time doing that with some of the students.
I think the other thing that I noticed sometimes in the same vein is about youngsters doing so much on their own is it can be a little bit of a shock sometimes when they do come together and they meet quite a few young musicians their own age who are playing to a high level, and they suddenly start to want to benchmark themselves, and we have to really work hard to make sure that doesn't become a barrier, because then that's sort of that's eclipsing how they're feeling and experiencing the week, and so that they then again, that's another way of they then disengage from the moment, playing in the moment. So I think it's really important to all of us that we make sure that the environment is not competitive and it remains open and relaxed, because you can't get very far in this music without that. And I know that you two work really hard. Did you notice any ways that were helpful in getting rid of that competitiveness, Liam?
I mean, yeah.
Wow.
The competitive culture is hard. To me, it's linked again to the time thing. It's like, how good are you? How young are you? It's like, I just got out of nappies and I can already do this in every key and stuff. It's like, it's a kind of speed and impatience culture that's drummed into everybody about everything, and I feel a bit like what I try to get to is playing being as close as I can get to the experience of listening. So when you listen to a record and you're hearing all the bits and you're going, oh, that's great, that snare drum sound is great or something, that's how I want to be hearing music that I'm playing in. I want to hear somebody else doing something and thinking that's great, and still taking care of my own sort of bit of the ensemble, you know. But it does, yeah, it takes patience, and also, you know, you can get it for a bit and then you start playing with some other people and then you think, I'm not getting it now, and I have to start again. And everybody's still all great, but you have to get used to how they do things, you know.
Absolutely, definitely. One of the things that, because I speak to all of them individually, we have a tutorial during the week, and I sort of pick up on a few of them feeling that they have to play in a certain way because someone else is playing like that. And I think that's something else that we work hard at, is to really reassure them that it's something to celebrate, that the differences are important, that you're bringing a different ingredient. We don't all want to sound the same. And the things that you were saying you're listening out for, it's by being different, you're getting those you're being offered those for you to hook into as a player. So I'm just wondering, outside of the education side of things, when you're putting your own projects together, both of you, do you feel that you shape things according to choosing the musicians because there are certain things about their playing that really excite you, and that's why you've chosen them to be in your projects? So Rowland, maybe first.
Yeah, definitely. With practically all the bands I've put together, you hear the sound of the players in your head straight away, even when you're writing, when you're composing or doing arrangements. You can hear the particular sound you want, and then you can think of a particular person that you feel would provide that sound for you. So often, yeah, it's like a hand-picked band. When you put a band together, it's hand-picked with players who you feel have that sound that you need, and have the musicianship and the sensibility to musically provide the things that you want, you know, to happen.
What about you, Liam?
Well, I was just thinking about my experience in Bromley Library again, and going through all the albums, and I thought, wow, there's a whole ton of Duke Ellington albums. Is this the same guy? This is like 1921 and this is 1971. How is that possible? And then you flick through and it's like, hang on, Miles Davis, wow, he was doing stuff then, and he's doing stuff in he was, I mean, when I was first getting into him, he hadn't even done Tutu, like, so he was still doing stuff and still changing things. And I thought in my mind, they're still the two absolute sort of role models for band leading of that particular type, where you get a band and you evolve, and then you get another band and you evolve that, and you keep, you know, just the fact that they were able to keep going for that long, that I'd like to be able to do that. I mean, I only do one album about every 5 years. That's the way I keep going for ages, but
easy doing.
I can't afford any more than that.
And which comes first, chicken or the egg? Do you choose the band and then the repertoire, or do you choose the repertoire and then the band, Liam?
I think I spend quite a lot of time thinking about what the repertoire might sound like and end up not getting anything done. Then I choose the band, and then I think, oh, right, okay, now that I've actually phoned people up, I owe them something, you know, I owe them something. I mean, when I played with Tom Rainey, I'd heard his playing with Tim Byrne, and I thought, oh, I'm going to write all this complicated rhythmic stuff, which is the only time really that I've ever done that. And I didn't realise that just at that time he was kind of getting into playing more free music. So I'd turn up with these things. He'd start playing weird bits of brushes and funny sounds in the middle of things, and I was completely lost. But I'd written all these things because I thought I have to bring tunes. I can't just turn up, because I don't know. I know he's playing, but I don't know what it feels like to play with him. So I can't just turn up with little bits of tunes. And I remember Ellery Eskelin, the tenor player, saying he had this band with Jim Black and Andrea Parkins, I think. And they did loads and loads of really wide-ranging stuff. And he said at the beginning, he used to bring scores like this. and everybody would set music up and they'd be rehearsing for ages. And he had this band for quite a few years. He said by the end of it, he would just like get little scraps of paper and say, oh, I'm just going to sort of do this vamp. We'll get into it, and stuff would happen around it, you know.
Well, that leads nicely into one of the questions that I wanted to ask you both, from the composer, band leader, performer perspective. So someone that's all three. And first of all, do you see it as a spectrum, or do you see it as three very different roles, Rowland?
No, I see it all as one. I don't really compartmentalize things. You know, I don't split my brain into like 3 or 4 or anything like that. Everything is all one, because I always see music as music. That's why it didn't matter what genre of music I was playing. Music's music, and so yeah, it's all encompassing, I would say. And thinking about your earlier question, with different projects, it depends on what the music is as to how I decide on the lineup. You know, like there's certain musics where, yeah, you do think of the players first. I remember when I had my first main band, which is Brazilian influence, I was thinking of the players first for that, because I knew of players who had an affinity with Brazilian music for a start. Some had spent a lot of time in Brazil, some were from Brazil, you know, that type of thing. So I knew they'd bring something really potent to the band in that sense. Whereas on another level, I remember, well, there's certain bands I have where it's essentially is a duo, and we have different guests for each of the performances, and each of the performances has a certain different feel or a different thing. So you call in the guests accordingly that you feel would be appropriate for that type of thing or vibe. So it just depends on the band and what the music is. For me, it changes each time.
And once you've both written, how definite are you that this piece of paper that's got your ideas on is the definitive version, or how much of the process carries on evolving, Liam, after you've written something?
If I let it, it would carry on evolving forever. You know, I write stuff and I fiddle around with it and I throw it off. There's loads of things that I've thrown in the bin completely. Thought that this is rubbish after spending a month trying to get it right. You know, and like Rowland says, I think I battle with finding it all one thing. I would like to, but I find it really difficult, because I find composing, I'm a perfectionist, and the best way I can illustrate my approach to composition is by telling this story about when I was at school. I was in a woodwork class, right? And the first thing they did was give you a block of wood like this big, that wide, square, and a file, and they say, right, I want you to make a conker, like carve a conker out of this piece of wood, right? So the piece of wood is like this big, and a conker is like that big, so you don't need to file that much off. But by the time I'd finished it, it was like a peanut. It's like, nah, take a bit off that. Nah, that's not right. You know, and that's the danger for me with composing. That's why I need to book a band first. I need to have a reason. I need to have a gig where I show up with something. You know, and stuff can gestate for years. Like I had a tune in a manuscript book, and I was going back through stuff, and I looked at this thing and I thought, oh, this is finished, this tune. Why didn't I ever play it? But I think what had happened was that I had a different band. I had this quintet with Chris Batchelor, Shabaka Hutchins, Dave Wickens and Dave Whitford. And before, I was trying to write something for like a trio or something, and there just wasn't enough there. But I felt with those 5 people, when you bring them all in and all the little different things they might do inside it, that's enough. It's like, it's a short tune, you have a bit of improvising, you drop the tune in the middle, and that sends the improvising off somewhere else, and then that might be it, you know. But it sat there for about 5 years doing nothing.
Waiting. What about you, Rowland? When you write
question for me again.
So I was wondering, when you compose something, So when how easy you find to say, well, this is complete now and I'm going to take it and play it, and when you do play it, does it start to evolve further beyond the page?
I kind of, well, I usually get a satisfied feeling that I've done that composition now, is ready to be played. And if more happens to it later, it's just where I feel certain things could have been improved, certain areas could have been better expressed, you know, as in the writing. So it's usually I'm quite satisfied with the end product. So like, for instance, there's a composition I wrote, which was inspired by Love Supreme. And, but I knew it was going to be obviously a lot different from what Coltrane wrote. But I wanted to sort of like, you know, bring it into a modern day type thing where, because you know me, I've played in lots of different non-Western music situations now, and I obviously was aware that Coltrane had been heading that way, you know, playing with African drummers and Indian musicians and sort. So for this composition, it's almost as I started, I already knew the type of sounds and expressions I wanted. I knew the sort of sounds and expressions I wanted. For instance, from the Ansuman Biz was playing Indian percussion, and he was playing santur and things like that, as well as tablas. And then I wanted him to have a conversation with West African sound musicians. So I wanted that griot kind of sound of what you get from a lot of the kora players, like from the Gambia and Senegal and Mali. And so I wanted to marry those two together, which was a magical sound, because you had the santur and the kora, which is like, you know, the lute harp, the African lute harp, and the it's an amazing ethereal sound. Yeah. And then I wanted something a bit more earthy and powerful. And because I've done lots of Latin music, wanted to bring in the Santeria vibe, which is like the African Cuban feel. So I had lots of batar drums. So what I'm saying is I kind of knew the kind of like different areas that I've worked in non-Western music, and bring it to the table and marry them all together, and do it in a sort of cohesive manner. And then, so that was like the first quarter of the piece. The piece is about an hour and 10 minutes. And then the next phase, it then leads into the kind of like big band area where you get the, you know, that kind of more kind of like big band sound. So I forgot the point I was trying to make. But I'm just saying, compositionally wise, you know, there's times when you're kind of like given a theme, and you kind of go with that theme and you elaborate on it a bit, but you kind of, I always get a good framework of what I want from start to finish.
Right. And
once I've got that framework, it just becomes easy, just dealing with each section of the music. And then I get a satisfying feeling when you can feel inside your body when something's done. Yeah. So and then, you know, if you've got to do more to it, it's more like touch-ups or refining.
So you were talking, both of you have been talking about influences outside of the jazz world, and one of the things that you've both got in common is an interest in Japan. And I was just wondering whether you might both share your individual journeys there. I'm sure there'll be some overlap. Liam, might you first start the ball rolling with telling us how you first got into the world of Japan?
Yeah, I think it was through kind of Zen Buddhist sort of writings and stuff. But my dad always used to have loads of these books around the house, and I think he was trying to leave them out for me to read so that I could take some of it on, you know, because it was almost like he thought you know, if you want to be a musician, you're going to find stuff difficult. This is going to be helpful. I mean, I'm romanticizing my childhood here a bit, but it is something that stuck in my head as seeming to have a kind of grain of truth in it. And then from there I got into sort of bits and pieces of Japanese films and film music, and then like Takemitsu and Japanese traditional music. I think I kind of, I don't remember how I first started listening to it, but I think I heard some gagaku on the radio or something, and then I just thought, I had one of those moments like, what on earth is that? That's the weirdest bloody thing I've heard. That's the weirdest thing I've heard in ages. Like, how are they what are they doing? You know, what are those instruments? Why did that happen? You know, and I read a book about it because I was doing some research and was trying to get a research grant to go to Japan and sort of play with some of the traditional musicians and the kabuki theatre people and the gagaku orchestra in Tokyo. I think it was in Tokyo or Kyoto. And then I got commissioned. Actually, this was before that. Tony Dudley Evans in Birmingham commissioned me to do something, whatever I wanted. So I just thought, okay, if I can do whatever I want, I'm just going to go completely AWOL. So I did this piece for 2 singers, and then me playing keyboards, and then Dave Wickens on drums, Chris Bisco on alto clarinet, doing these settings of Japanese death poetry, which is like traditional poems that are written traditionally just before you die. So it's a very Zen Buddhist thing, but also haiku. And I'd bought this book, and it had such a lot of humor and such a lot of different range of subject matter and tone and everything, that I thought it'd be really great to do something with it. And the piece was a bit of a shambles in a way, but one day I might try and do it again with a better idea of how it would go. But I was using samples and keyboards and stuff.
Right.
I think the main thing about it for me was that it related to what I liked about certain things in jazz, like how Paul Blade plays the piano, how Monk and Ellington play the piano, where they'll play something and then you hear them kind of stop and go like, what's, you know, the weirder the sound, the more space there is around it, and it's like the sound changes after it's been played in your head, you know, you sort of hear bits of it. And that's what that's same with Miles Davis. That's what attracted me, the space of it. I think I saw a potential to cross over. I mean, piano's not an easy instrument to adapt into a sort of traditional Japanese music setting, but I was more like trying to get some of the concepts, mix it with whatever I was into, you know,
get a hybrid.
Yeah.
So Roland, I think you're actually going to play for us to talk about your relationship with the Japanese flute, and how might you tell us how you first got interested in the Japanese culture and the music?
It's in the main, it's 2 things. It's probably my flute teacher, and also just experiences. So when I was at Guildhall School of Music and Drama, in fact, when I was at Centre for Young Musicians, because I first had Kate Lucas at Centre for Young Musicians, Catherine Lucas. She was originally from Chicago, but spent a lot of time in the UK, and she was one of the foremost contemporary classical music flautists who's constantly on Radio 3 and stuff like that. So I already knew of her quite a lot and what she did. And so during her lessons, there just happened to be a lot of flute music she asked me to play, which weren't by Japanese composers, but they were by usually European composers who were completely inspired by the shakuhachi, which is the bamboo Japanese flute, this is a student one. That's what it looks like. And so it just dawned on me that the sound world that you get from this instrument is really fascinating, and it has inspired a huge number of competitions for solo flute. And and then I fell in love with the sound and the flute, the sound and the sound world, to the point where I would include it in some of my jazz playing, and especially in free improvisation. And also, I wanted to use it in my writing as well as being able to just improvise on it. So I thought it'd be a good idea to go to Japan and have some lessons and discuss things with some of the shakuhachi masters in Japan. So I went to Kyoto and studied with someone who had a flute school there, and saw two other masters in Tokyo. One in Tokyo had a practice right by a shrine, and someone who was just outside Tokyo. And so I got lots of different methods, from really, old school playing and from the modern style of shakuhachi playing. And I do some teaching at the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. And I go over stuff with the composers, especially the first year composers. And I share with them some of my experiences and the influences from the shakuhachi flute, and show them, how to write for it and the symbols you can use. And so when they compose something and I record it for them, it's kind of like, sort of they've sort of fed off what I've given them, and hopefully we'll take it somewhere further with them.
Might we hear it?
Well, what I'll actually do is I'll play for you something. This is a piece in particular that's highly influenced by the shakuhachi flute. There's a Dutch composer called Will Offermans, and he went to Japan himself and studied the shakuhachi flute. But he's written the music in a way that it transfers well to Western flute.
Might we hear just a few notes of the original though, so that we've got a point of reference? So might you just
from the
Japanese flute, so that we can see what it is we're aiming for.
Okay, well, this fellow is very hard to play.
Yeah.
Great.
And this piece
Very serene sound, isn't it? Very warm, serene sound.
Absolutely, yeah, and pure. But this is called Honami. I just play a few notes at the beginning, sight reading.
Wow.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So much nuance in there beyond the sound of the flute, that as we know it, there's so much detail sonically. That's beautiful.
Nuance is the word, yeah, definitely.
Might you integrate that in your improvising when you're playing? Would you include those colours in a jazz situation?
Totally, yeah, totally. Where I feel it, yeah, I'll bring it in, because you got some wind sounds, some hollow sounds, different textures, which can even bring out more of the music and the meaning in the music. So yeah.
Liam, what's your reaction to hearing the flute? Do you think you might write something now for the two of you at some point?
No, I'd love to. I mean, I did actually go to Japan for my honeymoon a couple of years ago, and managed to hear a bit of music in the course of doing so, and yeah, it's the thing of hearing a note, and then you think, oh, okay, that's a D or whatever, and then it's like it sort of fragments, and then like you hear sort of wind blowing through it, and then different attacks, and then harmonics, and you start hearing this whole thing that's just out of one note. You know, to me it does relate to jazz, because it relates to what I can hear in Sonny Rollins, or what I can hear in Don Cherry, or loads of other people, you know, of like, beyond the thing of how many other notes is it possible to play on a chord. It's like, how many ways can you play that one note on a chord, you know? How do you phrase it?
That
like
same note.
if you're playing a melody, you could play it in octaves, and then you could let one note of the octave go. That gets a certain sound. You could put a grace note, or you can play a semitone next to the note, and it sounds like a grace note, but it's actually a cluster. You know, there are all these things that, for me, it comes out of hearing music like that, you know.
Yeah.
And playing an instrument where you just hit a hammer and it hits a string, you know, how do you make that transition?
And it sounds to me, from the way that you both talk about it, which I know of you from having worked with you both as well, that really it's about the sonic spectrum, and that you're not going to start putting things in pigeonholes and say you can't do that because that's not jazz and that's not classical music. That you very much enjoy sound and what people do with sound, and ultimately that's the thing that excites you.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things that I really enjoy about working with both of you is that openness and receptiveness, that I know I can bring anything to the table, and that you'll, you know, give things a go and then start to take it on your own journey. And one of the things that I think is really important for the young musicians that we work with to realize is that, you know, teaching doesn't start at 6 and finish at 18 or 21. That when we're working together in a professional environment, we're all teaching and learning from each other as well. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of the jazz musicians we work with are such good communicators when they're teaching, is because you're having to do that on a daily basis within our own music, sort of constantly searching out, trying to find how to articulate our ideas. And I think that's why jazz musicians are such great teachers. And I've certainly learnt heaps from both of you, and still go on learning heaps and enjoying the sound you make. So I'd like to, before we move on to the final item today, I'd like to thank you both and just say, what is it about NYJC, when you've got such a busy portfolio of work, that brings you back to working with us? Liam.
I find teaching, especially coaching ensembles, is just massively stimulating. I mean, it's obviously rewarding to feel that you can contribute to the development of young musicians. I mean, I wouldn't presume that I do, but it's a good feeling to try, you know. And but it's also very stimulating for us, because it makes you think again about what you're doing, because essentially people are always kind of asking you, why would you do that? And instead of saying, I've always just done that, that's where F major is when I go like that, and then you have to think why, you know. And it keeps your musical brain alive, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. That agility. Rowland.
Well, I mean, I really like the enthusiasm of you know, the students. You know, I like the spirit, and I like their hunger, you know, and willingness to learn and to improve. So it's basically the getting it together, and you know, the shaping of things. And so it from when you start from the first day to where it ends up, it can be staggering. Like I have been staggered by some of the results that have happened, you know, on the courses. You know, the one comes to mind where I gave the students a particularly very demanding piece to play, which was rhythmically really complex. And yeah,
It's great.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I could tell to them they felt it was a bit of a daunting task, you know, at first. But we broke it down, and we took our time and went through everything bit by bit, and then pasted things together gradually, bit by bit. Yeah, to the point where it was very, very impressive. It was sounding really impressive. It was really dazzling, and they sort of played it with real panache, and I was really, you know, taken aback. But yeah, really happy with the results. But the thing is that the hunger was there in them. So, you know, they weren't going to be defeated. You know, they had this, you know, we're going to get this together. And what I marveled at was that they would you know, out off their own backs, just find times where they could be together and really work on it. Sometimes staying up till quite late.
Absolutely.
And they wouldn't give up until, you know, they felt they got it right, really tight together, and remember the rhythms. Because the other thing that musicians sometimes don't take enough care of are accents, and how you place the accents together and things like that. So it's things like that, and also learning to breathe together as well is important, especially, you know, with wind players. Rather than, sometimes it helps if you've got this kind of uniform way of breathing where you work out where you breathe together, and then there's things like the articulation. Right. So yeah, all those things. I was just so happy with the way they dealt with everything.
They always rise to the challenge, don't they? And I love the way that, you know, the thing that Graham Collier used to say, which is that jazz happens in real time once. And the fact that every year we've got, you know, 45 young musicians who are up for that, and that's their quest, is to work with you all so that they can be in the moment. I love the risk taking and the rescue as much as I do about the perfection, and the fact that they're being bold and they're growing into themselves and being true to themselves and feeling comfortable about that as well, because it's a really it's a very vulnerable time, you know, in your teens, and you need to really trust the environment you're in. And so I always feel really blessed working with you both, because I know that not only are they greatly inspired, but they're in really safe hands as well. So from NYJC, I want to thank you both for all that you have been doing and will continue to do. Thank you as a friend and as an inspiration to me both, and for bringing my music alive when we've worked together. And if anybody that's watching would like to donate to NYJC, we've got a little link where you can donate, because we're very passionate about making sure that all young musicians of all backgrounds have the access to this freedom to find themselves, be themselves, and to be with others their own, but they've got their own interest in the music as well. Because a lot of the musicians, they find it very difficult to find peers, people their own age, that have got that same passion. So that's one of the things they love about coming on the summer school. And about a third of the young musicians we work with, they are on some sort of scholarship. So if anybody would like to support our work, please follow the link. I'd like to thank you very much, Rowland, for joining us for the conversation. It's been great talking to you, and for demonstrating on the flute. What we're going to do is we're going to close with Liam. He's actually going to play us one of his pieces to close. So I think both Rowland and myself will take ourselves off camera and put ourselves on mute. So, but Liam, I'd like to thank you, because we'll close with you and we won't come back again and say goodbye. I think it's just a beautiful way to bring the evening to a close. So Liam, thank you very much. And might you tell us what the piece is that you're going to play, and we'll leave you to it.
I've just thought of it. It's a piece that I wrote called Matcha Mind, and it's about the green tea ceremony that I watched when I was in Kyoto. And I'm going to play it with the practice pedal down, because this is how I practice, because I've got people downstairs, and I've got really into the sound, so it's muffled because of that, but I like the sound of it. Right. So that's what I'm going to do. Shall I start now?